In this video, we're going to be looking at the best Pokemon that you can use to counter Dialga in Master League PvP. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the channel, trainers. My name is Oro Chris. I am your catching coach. And as we've been focusing on the channel the last couple of videos, Dialga is going to be a Pokemon that we need to have an answer for. Either you're going to have it on your team or you're going to have some strong counters for it. Now, what makes Dialga unique in Master League PvP, in Pokemon Go generally, is that as a steel dragon, steel typing provides a lot of resistances that help immunize the dragon aspect of Dialga from its typical counters. Typically, as we know, dragons would be weak to dragon attacks, fairy type moves, as well as ice type moves. But steel typing resists each of those types of attacks. As a result, Dialga only takes neutral damage from dragon attacks, ice attacks, and fairy attacks. What that ends up resulting in is that he's able to hit other dragons for super effective damage, but is not taking super effective damage in return. Similarly, with regard to its steel typing, usually steel would be weak to fire type attacks, but dragons, as we know, resist fire type attacks. As a result, Dialga is left with only two weaknesses, ground types as well as fighting type moves. So when we're considering what would make a good counter to Dialga, there are two strategies that we can employ. One, either to hit Dialga for super effective damage with fighting type or ground type moves, or to have a Pokemon that's going to resist all of the attacks of Dialga. For instance, Heatran as a steel fire type is going to resist the dragon type moves of Dialga. And in some instances, there are certain Pokemon that are both going to resist the attacks of Dialga as well as hit Dialga for super effective damage, the best of both worlds. Now, there are several things that we should be considering when we're making that decision about what Pokemon are we going to add as our check or our counter to Dialga. The first consideration, and perhaps the most important with regard to the discussion we're having, is how strong is the win against Dialga. Some matchups can swing, for example, in one direction or the other in favor of Dialga or the counter, depending on whether or not the Dialga trainer is willing to employ two shields, or if the opponent is unable to successfully land the necessary shield bait. For example, in the Dialga versus Machamp battle, we have in the one shield, a very decisive win in favor of Machamp, using the cross chop to deliver the knockout blow. But if we come down and we go to the two shield matchup, we see that battle swings the other way in favor of the Dialga trainer. So if you're willing to, as a Dialga trainer, employ two shields, you are now going to come out of that matchup just shy of another Iron Head and have the switch advantage going into the second Pokemon battle. A second key consideration for choosing a counter to Dialga is, does the Pokemon you're considering have the same weakness as Dialga? For example, a potential counter to Dialga would be Excadrill. Excadrill as a ground steel type is going to have a weakness also to all fighting type attacks that folks would be using to counter the main target, Dialga, and is also going to be weak to the ground type attacks. So choosing Excadrill on your team to counter Dialga is going to leave you open to every opponent's Dialga counter as well. And going along with that second consideration is, does the counter you're considering beat other Dialga counters? For example, Hariyama, because of its increased bulk, has a positive matchup with many of the other fighters in Master League. And finally, the third consideration when looking at what Pokemon would make a good counter to Dialga is, how does that Pokemon fare against the rest of the field in Master League? A Pokemon that is on your squad that is only going to have a positive matchup against Dialga, but loses to everything else, is ultimately going to be a liability more than it's going to be a strength. Now, one thing that I will tell you when considering these three factors is that as any one of them goes up, it's very likely that the other categories, or at least one of the other categories, goes down. And what do I mean by that? Pokemon that have the most positive matchup against Dialga are Pokemon that are going to both resist the attacks of Dialga as well as hit for super effective damage. One such example is Lucario. Lucario, as a steel fighting type Pokemon, is going to, as a steel type, resist the dragon type attacks of Dialga, and as a fighting type, it's going to be hitting for super effective damage into Dialga, as well as have access to that stab bonus, same type attack bonus, which adds 20% more damage to moves that are the same typing as the Pokemon utilizing them. Here, for example, Lucario as a fighting type, using fighting type moves, it's going to get a 20% boost to those attacks. And as we can see in this matchup, it is not even close. Moreover, we have got Lucario walking out of this with 2 attack stages of boosts coming into that next matchup with just shy of half of its health left. He's used 1 shield, sure, and probably in this scenario, it might even behoove the Dialga trainer to not even use the 1 shield. Yeah, you're going to walk out of there with so that 1 shield gets you from 54 health up to 62. So we're going to add 6 health to the opponent's Pokemon, and you're going to have 1 extra shield. So you're actually in a better position to just eat whatever Lucario is sending your way. But as we can see in this matchup, Lucario absolutely owns Dialga. This is a matchup very likely that you would want to swap out of as soon as possible. But there's no such thing as a free lunch. As Lucario, with its steel typing, is going to resist the dragon type moves of Dialga, it's also going to be taking super effective damage from all of the ground types, as well as all of the fighting types that are seeking to counter Dialga. So as one thing goes up, one of these considerations, a stronger Dialga matchup, it's very likely that that Pokemon is going to have a harder time with other Dialga counters. Or conversely, if they do well against the other counters, it may be a very close matchup against Dialga, as we saw with that Machamp battle a few moments ago. So when constructing your team, what you're going to want to consider is if you're using a Pokemon that has a positive matchup with Dialga, but depending on shields or depending on whether or not they need to land a successful shield bait, is going to have a tougher matchup, you want to have a Pokemon that is also going to be able to have a better matchup against other Dialga counters, or is going to be strong against the field generally. Which means that that Pokemon, if it doesn't have the right matchup with Dialga, or if things go south, other Pokemon on the squad will be able to shore up that deficiency. So when selecting your Dialga counter, if the counter that you're going to be using has a very strong matchup against Dialga, but it loses hard against the other Dialga counters, then you need to construct some other member of your team to be able to shore up that deficiency. For example, Kyogre has an amazing matchup against many of the ground type attackers. As a result, if you have got something like Excadrill, like Rhyperior as your Dialga counter, they're going to be weak to water type attacks, but they're going to be absolutely owning that Dialga matchup. But because they, as Steel or Excadrill or Rock type or Rhyperior, they're going to be weak to both fighting type attacks of all of the other fighting type Pokemon seeking to counter Dialga, as well as weak to the ground type attacks. So selecting something that's going to shore up that deficiency with the rest of your team is going to be extremely important. Moreover, if you have a Pokemon as your counter that has the same weaknesses as Dialga, it may behoove you to leave Dialga off of your squad altogether. One such example would be Heatran. In the Heatran matchup, Heatran as a fire steel type is going to have resistance to the dragon type attacks of Dialga. And as we can see, we walk out of that matchup in the one shield. Well, let's fix that. In the one shield matchup against Heatran, because of the great overall stats, hitting a CP at 100% of 3,754, with the steel typing resisting the dragon type attacks of Dialga, and hitting for neutral damage because, as we know, steel types would normally be weak to fire, but dragon resists fire. So hitting for neutral damage overall. So as we can see, Heatran walks out of that matchup with nearly half of its health remaining. But again, there is no such thing as a free lunch. Heatran as a fire steel type is going to be weak to fighting type moves. It's going to be doubly weak to ground type moves. So it's almost as if the stronger you are against Dialga, the weaker you are against other Dialga counters. So having a Pokemon like Heatran on your squad, you're going to have that Dialga matchup under lock. Good luck to you getting that matchup and getting those two Pokemon paired up with each other. But if you've got Heatran on your squad and you're using that as your potential counter to Dialga, you do not very likely want to have Dialga on the same team, because now you're going to have two Pokemon weak to fighting, two Pokemon weak to ground, and one of them doubly weak to ground. With all of those considerations behind us, what are my top picks for counters to Dialga? These are Pokemon that have unique typing, that have resistances to the other potential Dialga counters in many respects, and generally have very positive matchups across much of the field. So what are my top picks for Dialga counters? The first and foremost is a Pokemon that has resistances to both of the Dialga counters we've discussed, those being ground and fighting type moves, and that Pokemon is Heracross. Heracross as a bug fighting type is going to be hitting for super effective damage into Dialga, as well as all of the Pokemon that potentially could be used as Dialga counters weak to fighting type moves, such as the steel typing of Excadrill or Lucario, as well as the rock typing of things like Rhyperior. Because we just had that Rhyperior Community Day with the Rock Wrecker Community Day move, a very strong move, I think that we're going to be seeing plenty of Pokemon like Rhyperior in Master League PvP when it rotates, when Go Battle League rotates on February 24th. So Heracross resisting ground types, resisting fighting type moves as a bug type. It's going to be very, very well situated against the rest of the Master League meta, because a lot of teams are going to be running Dialga, and a lot of teams are going to have Dialga counters on their squad. Moreover, as we may recall from the times when Sylph Arena Cups have had Heracross as an eligible Pokemon, that double weakness to flying is painful. But in Master League PvP, very few Pokemon are running flying type attacks. Dragonite, for example, as a flying type dragon type Pokemon, is almost exclusively going to be running double dragon or triple dragon movesets. Similarly, Togekiss, admittedly, Charm is going to be hitting for super effective, but as a flying type, it's not using its flying type attack. Virtually everyone is going to be running the standard set of Charm, Flamethrower, and Ancient Power. Moltres, for example, you would need to have the Community Day move of Sky Attack in order for it to have that typical flying type coverage. As a result, I would expect to see very little, if any, flying type attacks coming the way of Heracross. Now, admittedly, I do know that the Heracross as a regional exclusive may be somewhat hard to come by, but it was a featured Pokemon in the original Pokemon Go Fest. As a result, I think that it's fairly likely that a lot of folks know someone that went to that first Go Fest and has a Heracross available. If you can trade for it, go for that lucky. Try to find a lucky friend for that guaranteed lucky trade, and consider looking for that Heracross to max out. Moreover, it's only a 3-kilometer buddy, so if you start walking it now, maybe not for preseason Master League PvP, but in Season 1, when we finally rotate in a couple of months, you should be able to have that Pokemon ready. The second best counter, in my opinion, for the Dialga matchup is going to be Swampert. Swampert as a water ground type has but one weakness. And we're familiar with Swampert. It's been exceptionally strong in both Great League as well as Ultra League in the Go Battle League up to this point. And its reign in Master League is going to continue. It is one Pokemon like Togekiss that does well in all 3 leagues. Very few Pokemon can pull that feat off. One of the reasons that Swampert is going to be a top pick as a Dialga-counter is that there is going to be, much like I said with Heracross, very little grass-type attacks coming around Master League PvP. The top-ranked grass-type Pokemon in Master League PvP is Virizion. How many folks, other than maybe King, have powered up or maxed out a Virizion? As a result, I do not foresee much of the grass-type options coming forward in Master League PvP. Moreover, grass types, as we know, are going to be absolutely walled by Dialga. As a steel dragon, it's going to have 2 times resistance. Similarly, flying types like Dragonite with the recently non-legacy Dragon Breath, Dragon Claw combo, going to be doubly resisting the grass type attacks. Another reason we will see very little grass in Master League. The only potential, in my opinion, or one of the few potential viable options for grass type attackers, potentially we could have Gallade or Torterra. Torterra with Razor Leaf, that would hurt, I admit. But other than potentially those 2 Pokemon, there's going to be very little, if any, grass attacks coming around. So Swampert's going to be in a very safe position in the Master League. And in neutral matchups, Swampert does extremely well. Hydro Cannon is an extremely strong attack, and it can really hold its own. Its only surefire hard losses are going to be against things like Dragonite. They're going to have immunity tier resistance against the ground type attacks, as well as resistance to the water type attack like Hydro Cannon. So if you're going to have Swampert on your team, be sure that you have some type of an answer against against the dragon type Pokemon or the other flyers. My final recommendation as a Dialga counter, in my opinion, one of the strongest, if not the best option that you have for the Dialga counter slot on your team, is going to be Snorlax. Snorlax as a normal type is going to have only one weakness, that being, of course, fighting type. But as a normal type, it's going to have immunity tier resistance to ghost type attacks. And in addition to Dialga, I think one of the preeminent Pokemon, one of the key threats in Master League is going to be Giratina Origin Form. Giratina Origin Form running the standard set of Shadow Claw, Shadow Ball, and Ominous Wind. Because Snorlax is going to be resisting everything that Giratina Origin Form has to throw at it, unless it's going off meta with potentially Dragon Pulse, which we can talk about potentially in another video. It's going to be in a great position in that matchup, as well as be able to counter Dialga with its access to Earthquake. And because Earthquake is going to be hitting many of the other Dialga counters for super effective damage, things like Excadrill, Lucario, Heatran, for example, that is another reason that Snorlax is going to be well suited in Master League. Now, admittedly, Lucario with a couple of power-up punches into Snorlax, that's going to be a tough fight the other way. Now we're going to be focusing on Master League PvP over the next couple of weeks while we rotate into Master League on February 24th. If you are interested in Pokemon Go competitive PvP or basically anything Pokemon related, consider subscribing to the channel. And if you have any recommendations on Pokemon that you think would be great counters for Dialga, leave a comment down below. I would love to know what Pokemon you're considering running on your squad for the Dialga matchup. Thanks for watching, and as always, happy catching.